Let's go back to the story now. A ceasefire came into force in the Gaza Strip after Egypt and Qatar brokered an agreement between Israel and Hamas to halt 11 days of bloodshed. Thousands of people in Gaza and the occupied Palestinian territories poured onto the streets to celebrate the truce, waving flags and flashing V signs for victory. At least 232 Palestinians, including 65 children, were killed in the Israeli bombardment. Does a ceasefire represent a start to a long-term solution to the issues, or is it just a temporary solution that needs to be carefully dealt with? Joining us to discuss this is Human Rights Watch Director in the United Kingdom, Yasmine Ahmed. Yasmine, a very good morning. Thank you for speaking to us. I suppose that is indeed my first question. What do we read into the ceasefire?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me on your show, and thanks to your listeners as well. Obviously, the first thing to note is it's a great thing that there's a ceasefire. Obviously, we want to see the end of hostilities and the protection of civilians. And second thing is there should be accountability for any disproportionate use of force and any killing of civilians that was disproportionate to any military objectives. I think also it's very important to note before we get on to what now is that there are 2 million Palestinians who are occupied in Gaza, and not just occupied, but are blockaded there. And since the conflict, and actually before even this current violence, the healthcare system in Gaza has been decimated. It's very, very difficult to get medical supplies in, to get people out, to get the right medical treatment. So I think whilst it's excellent that we now have a cessation of hostilities, and that was necessary to ensure that the hundreds of people who have already died, that there is not more body counts on that. But I think that it's really important to note that Gaza now is left decimated, not only dealing with the casualties that they have to now, but the fact that there's still an ongoing COVID pandemic, and there wasn't even prior to this sufficient resources for them to deal with that. The second thing I think is important to note is whilst people are very happy about this ceasefire, the status quo is not acceptable. What the status quo means is that millions of Palestinians remain occupied, and within that occupation, they remain subject to severe, severe discrimination. And Human Rights Watch found in a report just prior to this violence escalating was that the discrimination faced by the Palestinian people was of such a severe extent that it amounts to crimes against humanity of apartheid and persecution.
Now, we understand that the Gaza Strip or this entire area is volatile. What triggered this latest fighting that took place?
What triggered the latest violence was the eviction of Palestinian residents in East Jerusalem from their homes. And essentially what's happened there, which is emblematic of the discrimination suffered by the Palestinian people that are living under the authority of the Israeli government, is essentially they are subject to severe, severe discrimination. And so essentially the residents of Sheikh Jarrah in East Jerusalem, and it should be remembered that East Jerusalem is in fact occupied territory. And when a territory is occupied, the occupier, namely Israel, is not lawful for them to impose their own civil and other laws. But in fact, that's exactly what's happened with Sheikh Jarrah and other parts of East Jerusalem, is that the Israeli government have imposed laws in 1970 which said that the owners of this land from 1948, if they were Jewish, they have a right to take back that land. But it's not the people who hold the key. In fact, it's organisations who are set up to take Palestinian land. But what we can see in terms of discrimination is that those very people who are living in Sheikh Jarrah were subject to displacement themselves and evictions themselves in 1948. And under Israeli law, they have no right to return to their properties. They have no right over their properties. In fact, they were declared absentee by the Israeli government. So really what this current violence is emanated from is the severe systematic discrimination that the Palestinian people face, in particular in the occupied Palestinian territories, which includes East Jerusalem.
Now, I'd like to imagine that there's certain terms that have been agreed in this truce. Are we privy to what those terms are?
We are not that I'm aware of exactly the terms of the truce. So they would have been negotiated. I understand that Jordan was part and Egypt were part of the negotiation. But what we can say is that we hope that it will end the current violence that is ongoing. But just to reiterate, I think the international community is incredibly important, and member states of the United Nations, including South Africa and others who have spoken out. It's important to note that these temporary escalations in violence do not and should not overshadow the systematic discrimination that is faced every single day by Palestinians. It's not only in relation to property, it's in relation to nationality rights, it's in relation to the freedom of movement. It goes on and on. The life of a Palestinian person is significantly different from that of a Jewish Israeli. And what we have found in our report is that there is a clear intent of the Israeli government to ensure that the Jewish Israelis dominate over the Palestinians.
Just final thoughts, if you may, Yasmine. It has been suggested in the media that this cessation is temporary. What are the implications of it being temporary?
Well, I think probably the best thing to do is to think about what that means for the 2 million Palestinian people who are living in Gaza. And also obviously recognising the instability and the threat that it faces for Israelis who are living in Israel within the Green Line as well. If hostilities are not ended and there is a chance that they will resume, the lives of these people are constantly under threat. And what we see again and again is it's shattered whole societies. The whole society, particularly those 2 million who are living in a tiny, densely populated urban area in Gaza, are subject to incredible and immense mental warfare and physical warfare and a complete decimation of all civilian and infrastructure, including water, including education, including healthcare, just the basics of life. To only have 6 hours of electricity a day if you're lucky in Gaza, to be able to get treatment for cancer if you're lucky to be given a permit, which many are not. So really...
Yasmine, we're going to have to call time on the conversation. We thank you so much for taking time to speak to us. Human Rights Watch Director in the United Kingdom, Yasmine Ahmed.